For more analysis on the changes in China's saving habits, we're joined by Jim Nolt, Senior Fellow with the World Policy Institute. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So give us your take on the factors behind the falling savings rate in China.
Well, one thing we should keep in mind is that China had a very extraordinarily high savings rate. So on the one hand, it's not surprising that it should come down somewhat. And a lot of that is demographics. The typical Chinese family in the last couple of decades has been two working parents and one child because of the one-child policy. And so there was a larger proportion of the population working, and working people are typically saving, and a smaller proportion of the population were dependents. But what's happening now is, as you mentioned in the report, is that you have more aging population, more retirees. Some people are having more children, so the number of dependents is increasing relative to the working population. And at the same time, people are more prosperous, and so they're not as worried about saving for the future. Even the development of the financial system has made it less necessary to save, because in the past, people may have saved for many, many years in order to be able to afford a home purchase, which now they can make somewhat more easily because of the development of the mortgage market, for example.
So it sounds like you're saying this isn't necessarily a short-term phenomenon, more of a perhaps longer-term trend.
Absolutely. I would agree with that, because especially China will be a rapidly aging population in the coming decades. And of course, as people retire, there are many fewer workers supporting a large number of retired people. Then people will be drawing down savings rather than adding to it in net.
Now, obviously, this is something that can come with a growing economy, a growing middle class. But at what point should China start to worry about the savings rate dropping too fast or perhaps to a dangerous level?
Well, that's the thing with China, is a lot of things have been going very fast, including their growth. And so both positive and negative changes can come very quickly. And one of the things to watch, which your report also mentioned, was the problem of growing household debt. And in fact, private debt in general has been taking off rather rapidly in the Chinese economy. And there's a potential that some of the ways in which the savings is being invested might not be productive enough to support the long-term financial development of the country, in which case, if there's a financial crisis, some of that savings could evaporate with the decline in asset values and the decline in the investments that people have made.
So then with this lower savings rate, how does this either help or hinder China's economic restructuring?
Well, many people have said for years now that China has needed to increase its consumption and lower its savings rate. The government supports that idea as well, because China has for a long time grown primarily through exporting and also increasing investment to get a high level of growth. But as it becomes a more mature economy, investment slows down, and of course, now with trade difficulties, exporting is also slowing down. So China has to absorb more of what it can produce through domestic consumption. And if people consume more and save less, that will help actually China structurally move toward a more consumption-driven economy.
So as China continues to open up to the rest of the world, including foreign investment, how do you see that affecting the savings rate?
Well, foreign investment can help bring capital in from abroad, which will lessen the need to have Chinese savings to create the capital needed for investment. You know, the United States, for example, has a very low savings rate, but absorbs a lot of capital from abroad, which is one of the reasons why growth can continue. So China may move a little bit more in the direction of getting a larger portion of its capital from abroad rather than from the savings of people at home.
And obviously you mentioned this big issue of debt. Can we expect any sort of oversight in this department, especially since we see this rise in these financial services, not all of them tightly regulated?
Yeah, this is a problem, because many people feel that the ordinary banking sector in China is probably not too risky because the government's going to backstop it. But there's so many other kinds of financial institutions, many of which are not regulated or supported by the government. So those have been growing very quickly, the so-called shadow banking sector. And many of those are more vulnerable if there is a kind of financial crisis, that they may have, some of them may collapse and have a negative effect on growth rates, and also people may lose savings that way, as some of the places where their investments were put end up being insolvent or bankrupt.
So what are some of the things that perhaps the Chinese government can do to support domestic consumption while also offsetting some of the challenges that may come for this increase in these financial services?
Well, one thing, there's actually room for the government itself to save less because the Chinese government, in fact, is one big component of the overall national savings. So potentially the Chinese government could spend a lot more itself and, save less or give more money back to the people in the form of tax rebates or tax reductions. And indeed, there's been talk about that in recent months. That would certainly also stimulate consumption if people had lower taxes and higher incomes.
All right, thank you so much for your insights. Jim Nolt there of the World Policy Institute and New York University.